Hello and welcome to Philip's Thoughts, and happy Veterans Day. I thought for this Veterans Day what I would do is just share some stories that were told to me by my father growing up. He was in World War II, and he didn't talk much about the war, but sometimes he just let a little bit out here and there. So I've got a few stories that I'd like to share, just so that we can get it documented. We can remember, these things that happened, many, many years ago. My dad, like I said, he did not really talk about the war too much. It was not a topic that came up. My dad, his biggest comments were, he liked comedies. He didn't like war movies because, there was enough pain and suffering in the world as it was. And he'd rather see some comedy and get a laugh than, watch a war movie. The one war movie that he did watch was Patton with George C. Scott, and he liked that. He said that was a really good rendition, interpretation of Patton. He thought George C. Scott did a really good job on that. But yeah, that was really the only war movie he ever watched much of. I mean, growing up, we always watched the war movies. They were always on, this time of year, all the old World War II movies. And, the most comments my dad would ever say, he'd go by and be like, yeah, what movie's that? He'd tell him. And, sometimes he'd be like, oh, do you see me? I was there. But, and then his other comment was also that, hey, if we had half the ammunition or a tenth of the ammunition they were using in the movie, they could have ended the war in about 2 weeks. Because, they just didn't have that much ammo. So, yeah, those were, my dad's comments and so forth as far as, watching movies and, all that kind of thing. He really didn't like glorifying war, which I think, is common among most veterans that have been in war zones. Now, as a young child, there were times when other guys would come over to the house that, my dad had served with, and, it was always just like, Mom would take us kids and, hey, get away, leave, let Dad alone with his friend. And it was always kind of a weird situation, so he'd be out there peeking out the window or something like that, trying to figure out who this guy was, why they were having these secret conversations, type of deal. But, that was, I guess, touchy subjects, and, just him needing, wanting his time alone with, these guys. Now, one person, which I wish I knew what his name was, I'd like to give him and his family a shout out. But he came by the house one time, this one gentleman, and, I was like maybe 6 or 7, if that. I don't know. I don't know if I was in school yet or not. But he came by the house, and he was outside talking with my dad, and I'm peeking out the window and out on the front porch, and I noticed this guy's hand was just gone. I mean, there were, a couple, maybe one whole finger and then a lot of stubs, and that was about it. It just really freaked me out. And, of course I asked my mom, I'm like, what's the deal there, and my mom's like, well, just ask your dad, whenever, he's done there. And I went ahead and, once my dad got done, he came back in the house, and I'm like, Dad, what happened to that guy's hand, And, my dad's like, oh, if it wasn't for him, you wouldn't be here, And I'm thinking, like, what? That guy's my dad or something? What do you mean if he wasn't for him, I wouldn't be here, Like, really confused, little kid. Just like, what? I don't get it. But apparently, during the war, they were hiding out in their foxhole. There were him and, I think, two or three other guys. And, they were in the middle of heated battle, and they were, shooting, looking out, the foxhole and stuff, and shooting and so forth. And apparently, a German hand grenade came into the foxhole that they were in, and this guy was the only one that saw it. And, he grabbed the hand grenade, yelled grenade, and threw it up. And, of course, all the guys, they hunkered down. He threw it up, and when his hand was up in the air, it went off, and just shredded his hand. But my dad said, yeah, if he hadn't done that, there would have just been 4 dead guys in that foxhole. So, he sacrificed his hand in order to save their life. So, don't know what that guy's name was. But hey, kudos to him. Definitely a true war hero. Hopefully he was recognized for that. And of course, over time, those visits, got fewer and fewer. And I have to understand too, the war was back, World War II time frame. And then, when I was a little kid, that was in the 70s and stuff. So you're talking quite a few, a couple, 3 decades, since the war. And these people were still, coming by to, reminisce or at least, talk over what happened and so forth. And, my dad mentioned that, there are a lot of guys that he knew, they were from all over the country and stuff, even when he went to basic training and so forth. So who knows where these people are living as, grown adults and stuff, to make the journey to visit my dad. I like that they did that, I think, it probably helped my dad, probably helped them, talk and, hey, we're still here, kind of thing. Now my dad, he said, like when he went to, basic training and so forth, back in World War II, my dad said that a lot of the guys there, they had never had shoes, the clothes that they had were typically hand-me-downs, so a lot of the guys, they were, thrilled to get, all these free clothes and stuff, with uniforms and shoes and, the food they thought was great, kind of thing. For some people, they were eating better than they had, during that time frame. You had the Great Depression and stuff, and so it's kind of a mixed bag as far as, going off to war and, getting things that you never had before. So I find that story interesting. Makes you think about everything that we have today. We've got so much, really. Even the poorest of us in the United States have quite a bit compared to way back then. Now my dad, he initially, when he went in, he was in a unit and they were supposed to destroy tanks. There's some type of a tank killer, unit, and their mission was to get close to tanks and attach bombs. And they would, supposedly, like be in foxholes, whatever. The tanks would go over, they stick it up there, and then scurry out and stuff, and the tank would blow up. My dad said that like a week or 2 weeks before he was supposed to, graduate that program and ship out, they canceled it. Luckily for him. Apparently, most of the people that were assigned to those duties did not come back alive. Their life expectancy was rather short over there, which, you can see why. It's kind of a ill-conceived way of destroying tanks, really. So, they went ahead and shut that down. Now, my dad did say one time when they were in their training and stuff, it had rained for like a week, and the foxholes were full of water and everything. And he said, one of the captains on the base, like, hey, you guys need to get out there and train. You guys need to, practice this stuff. And, during war, you're going to have rain. You got to get out there and do this. So he forced everybody out there. Of course, they're jumping the foxholes, which are full of water. And then you got a tank going overhead. And of course, since the foxholes have been full of water for like a week, it was really soft and muddy kind of thing. So the tanks, when they went over, they sunk down. And I guess several people got hurt during this training. And my dad said they did not see that captain again. He was reassigned somewhere, but not there. They got rid of him. So, anyways, after that, my dad, like I said, he didn't get to go over and try to blow up tanks that way. They went ahead and shipped him out to another area. I think he was like in Texas originally for training, and then he ended up moving him out to California, I think it was, for some more training, and he became an forward observer for artillery. Basically, go out, scope up where the bad guys were, and call back some coordinates and stuff so that our artillery could blow them up from a distance instead of trying to attach bombs to the tanks. So that's what my dad ended up doing when he finally got over there. Now, like I said, my dad, really didn't have a lot of great, like, oh yes, it was wonderful, war is awesome. No, there was really none of that. Now, he did mention one time they had, some downtime, as it were, and I guess his sergeant was in the middle of a card game and he had to deliver a message, said, hey, you need to go get on the radio, so-and-so's calling. And a sergeant basically said, here, sit in for me, play this hand, don't lose, kind of thing. And my dad ended up winning a bunch of money. I can't remember exactly how much it was. I want to say it was in the hundreds of dollar range, which, hey, back in World War II time, that was quite a bit of money. And so I asked my dad, I said, hey, did you get to keep some of that? And Dad's like, no, I didn't, but, I got a 2-day pass or whatever, kind of thing. And I'm thinking, well, that stinks, But, my dad was happy with it. Hey, he didn't have to do anything for a couple days. So that was, one of the good times that he had there. Now, of course, being a forward observer for the artillery, he spent a lot of his time behind enemy lines. And one of the times he was behind enemy lines, and I guess they were partnered up, so he had his partner with him. But my dad ended up having his appendix go bad on him, and his partner had to literally carry him like, some crazy distance up over a mountain to get medical treatment. So, again, there's another time where my dad could have possibly died out on the battlefield, but, luckily, he had some good people around him. And, my dad did, one of the shows my dad did like watching was MASH, which I always thought was kind of weird. But my dad mentioned that, in this instance, when he was getting his appendix worked on and stuff, that the doctors were just the same as they were on MASH. They were constantly, joking and, stuff like that, trying to keep people's, moods up, and humor's the best medicine kind of thing, so my dad really appreciated that. So now, speaking of times my dad could have passed away, there was one time, and this was later in the war, my dad said that they were getting in recruits, and like I said, my dad went through like essentially 2 versions of basic training. And I forgot. Let me backtrack a bit. My dad, when he did go ahead and graduate, and they were going to ship him out, they were sending him up to New York and stuff. And there was one friend of my dad's, when they were getting ready to ship out and everything, they had to get out there in their, uniforms and all this, and they had to present their weapons to, the colonel or general or whatever he was that was going by and all that kind of stuff, as their final thing there on the base before they'd ship out. And my dad said, one guy's like, hey, I'm not going, I'm out of here. And my dad's like, yeah, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? He goes, oh, you'll see. So I guess when, the guy came down and, the guy presented his weapon to him, and when the guy went to take his weapon, he just kind of leaned in and kissed the colonel or general or whatever he was on the cheek. And my dad said he was still standing out there, and he saw that guy in civvies in the back of the truck waving goodbye as he left, because he was, hey, you're a homosexual, you're out. And I told my dad, I was like, why didn't you kiss somebody? And my dad's like, of course, back at that time, I was like, what? Be labeled that for the rest of my life? It's like, who cares? But you're guaranteed to live. That guy wasn't getting shot at, for the next 2 years or whatever. So that, mindset though, my dad, he was in, that generational mindset of, that was bad. And, plus, I think even if that wasn't bad, my dad was also of the mindset of, this is what you do for your country. He's a very patriotic individual. So that was standing. But then I guess, they got on a train. They were going from the train from, I want to say, like I said, I think they were in California, and they were taking the train and they were going out to New York, and then they'd be shipped out, kind of thing. So, of course, as they're going on this train ride, they're going up through West Virginia and through Pennsylvania and so forth. And one of the guys, I think they're two brothers that were there, and they were from West Virginia, and they were like, "Hey, we're out of here," and I guess these were a couple of guys that didn't have shoes and stuff, but when it came down to like, "Hey, we're going over there, we're gonna get shot at," it's like, screw this, we're gonna go jump off the train, we're gonna hide out, etc. And they'll never find us in the woods, of West Virginia, blah blah blah. And I guess they jumped off the train. But my dad said when the train pulled in, those guys were standing there with some MPs, so they had found a faster way to get to New York. My dad just said that was funny. So get out, So they thought they had it easy, yeah, we got it all played out, we'll hide out. It's there. So that didn't happen for them. So anyways, so they got, overseas. Now, like I said, there was a lot of training that was involved with my dad. He went through like 2 different groups of training, because of the one being canceled, etc. But my dad said towards the later part of the war, there was a lot of GIs coming over, and they called them greens because they were really green. They didn't know much. He said basically they stuck a uniform on these guys. They gave them a gun, said, "This is the edge you point at the enemy. Don't point it at yourself. Pull this thing," and it shoots. And that was bad, the training that they got. I'm sure they had more than that, but from my dad's understanding, they really didn't have a ton of training. And at one point, where my dad's unit was, they paratrooped a whole bunch of these guys in. And my dad said for about 3 or 4 days, they just sat in their foxhole and they played cards. And he says, yeah, you didn't look out. He says, you just kind of sat in there, and played cards and just ignored whatever was happening around you and stuff. And I'm like, well, why? Why'd you just do that for 3 or 4 days? And he said, well, because these guys shot everything. He said, by the end of the 3 or 4 days, he said there wasn't a bird, there wasn't a squirrel, a rabbit, and actually quite a few of the people that paratrooped in were shot. Unfortunately, my dad said they even shot their preacher when he stood up to, take a piss out of his foxhole one day. He said these guys were just so scared. They were petrified. They had heard all the war stories and stuff, and they were just ill-prepared for it. So by the time these 3 or 4 days went by, maybe a third of that group was still around. And by that point, some of the sergeants and so forth, started getting people together and, getting them organized. He said, but up to that point, he said, no, you just didn't do it, poke your head out or anything, because these guys were just shooting panicky at anything that moved. And it was just safer just to sit down there. He said, there's no way, enemy German or anybody could have got anywhere close to them because of, these guys being so, shooting happy. And that's one of the sad things of war, and, I've never seen anything about that out there, but, it's just one of those sad things, friendly fire, as it were, I guess. So that's one instance where my dad could have easily been killed, like I said, from friendly fire type of thing, if he had poked his head out of that foxhole. Here's another time, where my dad could have passed away. He said he was, I want to say it was in France, might have been in Germany somewhere, I'm not entirely sure. But he was for reserve for artillery, so he was behind enemy lines quite a bit. He said he was going, crouched down, there was like a 4 or 5 foot tall stone wall to his back, and there was a tree line a few hundred yards away. So he was keeping his eye on the tree line because he didn't know if there were any Germans or, anything in there. So he's kind of keeping his eye there, and he's going down along the wall. And he said he got down to one point, and he stopped, and he just kind of leaned back on the wall. And then it just dawned on him that this wall that he was leaning on didn't feel like stone. It felt too smooth. And so he kind of, and that was just on his back, I mean, he was holding his rifle and whatnot. And he kind of looked back and he touched it, and there was a German tank with its, barrel, thing spinning a little bit there. And he kind of freaked, and he said he looked down, and the wall ended like 100, 200 feet down. Which he hadn't noticed because he was so focused on the tree line over there. And I asked my dad, I said, "Oh my God, Dad, what'd you do? How'd you get out of that?" And my dad's like, "Well, after I shit my pants, I hauled ass back down along that wall." And I was like, "What did the Germans do?" And he goes, "I don't think they did anything. They were probably too busy laughing at this stupid American, to bother shooting them, kind of thing." So that I just thought was hilarious. Again, just one of those things where, yeah, my dad could have easily been killed, but he survived. He, worked out well for me anyway. Now, my dad did have a few souvenirs that he brought back from World War II. He had a couple handguns. He had a small rifle that I recall. A couple bayonets. He had a bunch of money from France, Germany. I think he had some Italian money as well. And maybe even some, English pounds or whatever, I'm not sure. But, it was just money he had souvenir-wise, I mean, of course, the, German money there wasn't any good after the war and stuff. And, of course, the money, I guess, it got ruined when one of my sisters took it to school, and one of the teachers thought they'd be helpful, and they stapled it all together. And that just freaked my dad out. I'm like, why is this all stapled together? So that didn't go over well. Now, as far as the rest of the souvenirs go, which, in fact, my dad did have a friend that I guess he had sent some souvenirs home with, earlier, because his friend got out before he did. And he said, "Here, take this stuff." And I guess he had some, really decent stuff. And the friend basically took off with it, disappeared with it. Now, who knows what happened for sure back then. Who knows? Things could have got lost in shipping or whatever, or maybe his friend just did rip him off, kind of thing. Who knows? But that was kind of sad. That upset my dad a bit. So my dad had a few things, like I said. He had, a few trinkets. One of the things he had was this little handheld flashlight that you sit there and you just kind of hand crank, which, frankly, if you were trying to sneak around with this flashlight, there was no way. It made so much noise. I mean, it was the noisiest flashlight ever. So it's not like you're going to sneak up on anybody with this thing. And if you're using it for any length of time, you're going to end up with, big Popeye forearms, from sitting there constantly cranking this thing. It was a neat little toy, but real practical use, I don't think there's a whole lot to it. Just don't see how you could use that for any length of time, Yeah, just think that would have been bad. But as far as the souvenirs goes, my dad ended up selling most of those later on in life. And I asked him why, and basically he was just worried about, the family, us kids fighting over who got what when he passed away. So he figured it was best just to go ahead and get rid of all that stuff. And I think that's about it. I'm trying to think if there's any other stories that my dad had regarding, the war, other than, I do know he wanted to go back over to France at one point, in his later years. I wish we could have afforded to send him. Always kind of joked around with Dad, saying, "Hey, did he, got a second family over there or something? What's going on?" And he would just kind of, poo-poo that whole idea there. But, I think he kind of wanted to get over and trace his steps maybe a little bit. I don't know. But yeah, I just thought I'd go ahead and share that with you, kind of get, his stories out there. Like I said, my dad didn't talk about it. I mean, that was the generation that it was. That was before, PTSD was really a thing. And yeah, I mean, my dad never seemed upset like with fireworks or explosions or anything, anything like that. But he definitely, was not into war and stuff. My dad wouldn't even go camping. I asked him one time, hey, why don't we go camping? Some of my friends go camping, with their families and stuff. And my dad was like, hey, I camped out enough during the war, I've earned a bed, so he could not see, sleeping on the ground ever again. So, who could blame him? So, that is war stories of my father. And just thought I'd share that with everybody, get this documented. If you want to see some pictures of, World War II that my dad brought back, I have a separate video that I did last year for Veterans Day Remembrance. Just got a little bit of music to it, got me jabbering at the beginning. But I recommend, go ahead and check that out. You can see some of the pictures of my dad and, folks that he was with. And, some of the cities and so forth that he went through. It was really interesting. So check that out as well. Hello and welcome to the end of the video. If you like this video and you'd like to see more, please click subscribe down below or follow, depending on which platform you happen to be catching this video on. And come on back for some more and check out some of my previous videos. And until next time, keep thinking and enjoy.